This is the final result of today's video. You're gonna have this character controller who, if he doesn't have a target, he's gonna, if you hold down the strafe trigger or the targeting trigger, then he's gonna go into a combat stance and move in the direction that you point him towards. Now, if he's near an enemy character, then he will look at the closest one, and after getting far enough away, he will disengage and go back to looking in the direction that you point. Here's the problem that we're going to address. We have this null reference that we've got whenever we're holding down on the left trigger on your controller, or whatever your strafing, your targeting button happens to be. So when we press play, I'm using the Xbox 360 controller, and to target, I hold down left trigger. So you get this null reference error, and in your game, you guys can continue to move around. I've already changed some things, so this is why I'm stuck. All right, we'll fix this by going into the Explosive LLC RPG characters code, and we're going to open up the character controller. We're going to open up, yes, character controller, right? And we're going to add these properties, okay? We're going to change the target from public to private, all right? So we're going to encapsulate this class and its variables. We're going to add a public void set target where we pass in a game object T and set the target to that object. We're going to have a bool that checks if we have a target. We'll give public access to that target through a getter, and then we'll give public access to the target's position through another getter. All right, so this will be super important for rotating our character towards our target's position. Okay, so just add these properties and change this variable in your RPG character controller. The next thing that we want to open is the combat test. Okay, so this is just in that code that we had put in last time. In the last video, we'd added this combat test to give us some combat methods. What we're going to do here is add a reference to our character controller. We'll set that by default to null. When we add that, we need to make sure that we're bringing in the RPG character anims namespace. So make sure you're using RPG characters anims. Okay. Now we'll add two methods. We're going to add a public method which we will call from our input controller called look for target. Okay. So this is just going to find the closest enemy to your target. The closest enemy to your character. It's not going to go by where you're looking. Alright, we can change that later, but for now we're going to do this in the simplest way possible. So what we're saying is we're going to go in and do the physics overlap sphere. So we're checking around the player for colliders that carry the enemy layer, that are on the enemy layer. Alright, and we're going to find the closest one and return it. And if that's not null, then on the controller, where we just added these properties, we're going to set the target to the closest enemy to our player. Okay, the input controller that I was referencing is this one that we've got from previous videos where we had used it to move through skills. Okay, so we're going to add a reference to our combat test script. Actually, I added this before, but we don't need it. So really all we need in the beginning of update, I've added this check to see if we're holding down on the targeting button. Okay, so in my case, it's the left trigger for the Xbox 360 controller. So if we're holding it down, then it's a float that's going to be from 0 to 1. So if it's not 0, then we're going to look for a target in our combat test. Okay, so it'll bring in the closest enemy to our player. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to go into the player and make sure that I've got my input controller on here. All right, so I'm in debug mode. I'll go back to normal. All right, so I do have a reference. Remember that combat test script is on the player, so make sure you drag that onto your combat control, and then on the player, make sure you bring in the character controller, because that's where we're setting the target. Okay, let's go ahead and press play and see if when we get close to the enemies, I'm going to go into debug here so that we can see. All right, so here we have our target, and it's null right now. So I'm going to get close to an enemy, and I'm going to hold down left trigger. Perfect. So now I'm looking at whatever enemy happens to be the closest. Great. And again, we should still have that null reference. Actually, because we don't nullify our enemy when we go away, we'll still be looking at that. So let's start that with a null enemy. Right, so if we don't have an enemy, we'll still get that null reference, and we'll just eliminate that right now. We should, however, nullify our target after leaving the area, because we don't want to come out here and still be looking at someone that's 20, 30, 100 meters behind us. Here's the fix. It looks more complicated than maybe it has to be, because we could just remove all this extra if statements and just always set the controller's target to this target object regardless of whether it's null or not. However, we might have instances where you'd say, in this case, the controller did have a target and then it lost its target. So we might fire off an event that says on lost target. Okay, so I'm going to leave this in there so that you guys have an idea of how to use that. Okay, so if we're passing in a non-null object, we're going to set the controller's target to that object. Otherwise, if we do have a target but now we're not in range of any targets, we're going to pass in a null target. Okay, so we'll take a look at how that works. So here I am, I've got no target, so I can't really do anything, and I get that error message. But if I get close to the enemies and hold down the left trigger, I start looking at whoever's closest to me, and now I get away and there's a problem, right? Now I've got that null target. Okay, so that's working exactly as we would expect. The final step on this target and strafing system is going to be going back into Explosive LLC RPG character code and grabbing the movement controller. So there it is. Okay, now what we need to do is get currently what you've got around these lines, around line 155, excuse me, I guess it would be 150. You have this strafing call, and it passes in something that looks like this. We're going to change that. We're going to change it from getting the character controller's target to using this strafing target that I've put in to this code. Alright, so in both of these instances where you see the call of strafing, right, so press Control F and then strafing with the opening sign of the parentheses to go ahead and find those instances. Alright, I don't want to show Explosive LLC's code here. What you're going to do is add these targeting properties. So I've added in these three private vector3 properties where if we have a target on the character controller, then we'll pass its position in. Otherwise, we're gonna send our current look direction. The target position is, oh wow, that was kind of stupid. Right, we don't even need this. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that and just put that in there. All right, so we'll simplify that even further. Now the current look direction is wherever you're pointing on your with the controller or your mouse, plus your transform position. Okay, so we'll see how that looks, and then I'm going to show you a visualization of this position. Okay, so let's go ahead and press play, and you're going to see that if I don't have a target, I'm going to look in the direction that I'm moving in with my controller. Now if I do have a target, then I'm going to look at that target, strafing. Okay, so that's working pretty well. Now it's got kind of a strafing look to it when I'm holding down left trigger here. So if you want to change it to kind of a combat stance while you're moving freely, then you can just hold down left trigger by using this method. If you don't use this method, then you'll get those errors that we had before. Now I'm going to show you real quickly a visualization of where look direction is. Okay, so let's say look dir shower. We'll set that to null. Okay. And then whenever we call this method, we're going to set the look direction shower's position to the strafe target. Okay, so all I'm going to do is right click and add a cube in here. Oops. So I'm right clicking. Actually, I'm going to do that under my player so it's close to the player. Alright, so right click, add a cube. I'm going to set the cube at a distance to the player of 2 and at a height of 2, and then I'll unchild that from the player, and I'm going to pass it into my movement controller. Alright, so excuse me, sorry about that. Put that in there. Alright, now I'm going to look around freely and it'll show you about where that look direction is. Okay. Hopefully this video has helped you out. In the future, I'll show you how we are going to do the skills on this, how we're going to add the skills into... Oh boy, that was interesting. Make sure that you go back in and remove those references to the look direction shower and save your script. Now that we've gotten through targeting, we can finally get to using skills in animation events in order to level them up and level your character up. If you like this video and you want to see more content like this, please give this channel a subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and if you have any suggestions or complaints, whatever, go ahead and leave a comment. Thanks a lot.